My name is Dara Seville, and I know a lot of people in the audience here tonight, and I see there's some herbalists who are joining us and also lots of Native Plant Society folks. So I'm absolutely delighted to share the evening with everybody. Thanks for spending your time with me. I am here this evening to talk with you all about the Ecology of Herbal Medicine, my book, and some of the fun stuff that I've included in my book. And hopefully some of you have already seen it or browsed it or read it. There's a lot there, so it'll take you a little bit to get through, but I'll give you a little sneak preview here tonight. And for those of you who are not herbalists or are not familiar with herbalism, I just want to say a few quick words about what herbalism is. So first of all, herbalism, when practiced at its fullest, is a very interdisciplinary field of study. Herbalists need to know a lot of things. I think somebody needs to mute themselves. I'm hearing a lot of background noise from somebody. But in any case, herbalists are interdisciplinary practitioners, and to engage in this practice to its fullest, herbalists need to learn a lot about a lot of different things, including myriad scientific fields such as ecology and environmental studies, botany, of course, physiography, and environmental change is a big thing that I've discussed in my book. There are a lot of other biological human sciences related to herbal practice, including anatomy and physiology, of course, and also phytochemistry. We need to learn about chemical constituents and how to extract them. We also act as counselors and business people, and we do a lot of different things. And so I think my book encapsulates not all of that, but a lot of that. And so we'll only touch on parts of that here tonight, because obviously that's a huge can of worms. But that is what goes into herbal practice. Herbalists are people who engage with their community, who engage with the land, engage with plants, and play a lot of different roles. And so I want to just tell you a little bit tonight about how I came to learn about those things through plants as my main teachers. Of course, I've had some incredible mentors, including Dr. Jerry Williams at the University of New Mexico, to whom my book is dedicated. And also many people here in the Native Plant Society have been really important teachers for me as well. And so I've been very grateful to be part of this group and to have received a lot of the knowledge that people have shared with me. So if you are not a member of this group and are interested in plants, it's a fabulous bunch of people to get involved with. So let's move right along here and start talking about some of the plants. I agonized over which ones to present tonight. It's always so hard to decide. I mean, it was agonizing to narrow it down to just 39 plants for my book, and I had to narrow it down even more for tonight. So I picked the plants for tonight based on a few factors, one being their prevalence and importance ecologically in our region, also their central role culturally that they play here for the folks in New Mexico and the Southwest, and also I picked plants that I feel have very important lessons for us. One of the things that I always teach my herbal students is that the plants directly can teach us if we are able to attune ourselves to them and to move beyond ourselves and see ourselves as part of living landscapes, as part of ecosystems, part of plants' lives. We as herbalists or as people who are interested in learning about herbal medicine, our minds immediately go to what are plants going to do for us? What is this plant going to do for me? And so it's immediately going into this mind frame of thinking of what can I get from this plant that's going to help me. But in reality, herbalism is a reciprocal process, a relationship. That herbalism is really about relationships at its core. And if we can establish very meaningful and attentive relationships that go both ways with plants, then we are much better practitioners and much more able to learn from the land and from the plants. And that's really what my book is about: knowing the land, learning from it, and applying that to herbal practice. And so all of these plants here tonight have really important messages that humanity could benefit by absorbing and putting into practice. So let's explore some of these. I have juniper first on the list. I think this is a plant that everyone in our region knows, and juniper species in fact grow around the world. And so juniper is a plant that is a component of many ecosystems globally, and also a fundamental part of many cultures around the world. And of course, it is a characteristic plant of our region. I fell in love with juniper woodlands very, very easily. It was not a tough sell for me. I really like juniper a lot. It's one of my favorite plants, and I think it's really underappreciated, I think perhaps because of its commonness. But juniper, pinon juniper woodlands are very important ecosystems. I believe there are about 17 species of plants which are known only to exist in that habitat type. And of course, these ecosystems provide tons of benefits to wildlife in terms of providing foraging and cover for numerous animal species as well. And juniper is a teacher of resilience. For me, that is the message that I received from this plant, loud and clear. And a message that humanity really needs to embrace and grapple with as we are experiencing climate change in all of its forms. Resiliency is something that we need to think about, not just for ourselves, but for all of Earth's systems, and of course, the ecosystems in which we live and play an active role. And juniper in its ecosystems is really an extremely hardy, drought tolerant, and resilient plant. It lives that every day. And really the message in my book is to observe plants and what work are they doing every day in their lives, in their ecosystems. How are they living their lives? And what work are they doing? How are they collaborating, working with other elements of their habitat? And that informs us in terms of how we live our lives in our communities. It informs us as herbalists about how these plants work as healing agents in the land and in our bodies. These plants are who they are, just like we are. They are doing work every day in their environment, and the same thing that they do out there, they do as herbal medicine. So when we understand them ecologically, it is a very easy way then to understand their medicine, because we are essentially, when we consume herbal medicines, we are essentially experiencing ecosystem interactions within our own bodies in a very intimate way. And it opens the door for us to understand the land and ecosystem functioning and environmental change in very intimate ways in our deepest bodily tissues. And so juniper, being this resilient, hardy, drought-tolerant shrub, and being so widespread globally, affecting so many ecosystems and so many human cultures, is this plant of just, its importance is legion. And every way we look at it. And as an herbal medicine, this is a plant that has helped humans and ecosystems engage in transitions. And so this is where this resiliency comes in. As an herbal medicine, which is, I know, what people really want to hear about, this is a plant that is very focused on transitional times in human lives and in human cultures. It has historically and continues to be used for some of our biggest transitional moments, including giving birth and dying. Juniper has been used ritually and medicinally to facilitate these greatest passages in humanity's existence. And I think metaphorically, humanity is undergoing a huge transition right now in trying to understand our role in Earth systems and how to play a different kind of role than what we've done. And so whether it is a plant that is helping us through birth, death, or the reinventing of ourselves as ecosystem collaborators rather than ecosystem consumers, Juniper is there for us to help us make these huge transitions. As a medicinal plant, it's extremely aromatic. The greens, the leaves that you know, have a fabulous, fabulous aromatic smell. When you take that internally, or you burn it, or you rub it on your body topically, that aromatic property is very decongesting. So it's commonly used for coughs and colds and that kind of congestion. But congestion isn't just in the respiratory system, it can be in our physical bodies and manifest as things like arthritis and chronic fatigue and other things like that. And juniper is also used in that way to help people as a physical relaxant for the musculoskeletal system. And this is one of the reasons why these aromatic properties help to move congestion and stagnancy. They help to relax the physical body. And they're also very antimicrobial, acting against a wide range of pathogens. So these combined properties make it an excellent herb for birth, for death, for transitions, and for all kinds of infectious diseases or health conditions that we might experience, and helps us to really open our world and see things in new ways. When we relax the physical body, we're removing a lot of blockages to blood flow, oxygen, nutrients. That helps open our mind, our bodies, our hearts. And juniper is also used for treating trauma, which is something I've been talking a lot about during the pandemic with my herb students. It's been a topic that keeps coming up. A lot of people have been dealing with old traumas, new traumas, and all the time we've spent alone or separated from our friends and family has exacerbated that. So juniper has all of these things, and that is me mostly talking about the leaves. And I want to talk just a moment very quickly about the berries. And you're looking at some unripe berries here. They're best collected later in the season when they're a little darker in color, but the berries are also used medicinally, have some different uses. Those are a really potent urinary antiseptic, so they're used to clean the urinary system when there is an infection in there or inflammation in there. Also, the berries are used as a carminative, which means that it cuts gas and bloating in the digestive system and improves digestion and alleviates symptoms of indigestion. Juniper is also a common ingredient in incense and many, many herbal remedies. It can be used topically and internally. Internally, I will caution, it is extremely potent and needs to be used in small doses. It can be very quickly overwhelming. But it is an herb that I use a lot of. And here's a photo of me processing it. One of my all-time favorite botanical remedies to make, and a very easy one, is to make juniper infused oil. And that's what I'm preparing to do here. I have some fresh branches, which I am separating the greens from the browns. We don't want to use those twigs, so I'm eliminating those. Those are great for burning in a fire. you know, if you have an outdoor or indoor fireplace. But the greens are what we want to use. I like to let them dry just overnight, so they're only slightly dried, and we don't want all those aromatics to disappear. And then I chop them up with my pruners, put them in that glass jar and cover them with oil and let that sit for a couple of weeks. And then I strain that out, and you have the most incredible massage oil to use as is, or you can further process that into other botanical remedies as well. I'm going to move right along to our next plant so we don't run out of time, but I do hope people will have questions. I love when people have questions. It's so much more interesting than just me. So please do add questions to the chat, and I will look forward to engaging in that conversation. Here's globe mallow. There are a number of Spherology species, and globe mallow is another of my favorite plants. Globe mallow is a plant that really opened the botanical world for me. So I have a lot of special gratitude for this plant. You know, as a teenager and young adult, I heard a lot of my friends talking about love at first sight. And I felt a little jealous. I had never experienced that. I wanted to know, what is that like to see someone from across the room and just fall in love? Wow. Then I saw one day a flash of orange out of the corner of my eye. And finally, I had my chance. Now I know what that feels like, because globe mallow just immediately entranced me and lured me into this world of botanical splendor where I live now. And it has changed my whole life. And so I love globe mallow for that invitation. That was so life-changing. And this is a quintessential plant of our bioregion. The Spherology of Coccinea ranges across the western states and the plain states, but most of the other species are really relegated to our desert Southwest bioregion, because this plant is another one that is really a plant we need right now in so many ways, ecologically, intellectually, spiritually, medicinally. It has just what we need right now to face our current circumstances. In its environment, this plant really likes hot, dry, and disturbed environments. That's exactly what we're making. So this is a plant that is aligning with all of the human follies that we are perpetrating in this world right now. A plant that is answering our need for botanical relationship despite all of what we are doing and altering. This plant is continuing to hang on and in many cases proliferate because of it. So it's also a plant that has a very intimate relationship with bees. Bees are pretty cool. We've had some excellent presenters on that here in the Native Plant Society. And globe mallow is a plant that works and grows in tandem with bees and provides a lot for those very important pollinators. And so they have that symbiotic relationship. And really, as an herbal medicine, this is a plant where we mostly use the aerial parts, the leaves and flowers. The roots are also medicinal, though I usually try to avoid pulling up plant roots in wild locations unless there's just a huge abundance of it. But this is a plant that's probably invited itself right into your yard. I know I have a lot of globe mallow, multiple species in my yard that I've never planted, and I live here in the Valley in Albuquerque. So this is a plant we can find readily in a lot of different habitat types. And that's another thing I love about this, not too picky about where it's going to grow. So you'll find it in a lot of places. And these do cross hybridize. So sometimes for those of you who like to key out the species, it can be a little bit tricky and sometimes inconclusive. They can have traits of more than one species on a single plant. But globe mallow is a plant, I would say this is probably one of the most used herbs in my apothecary because its medicinal applications are so critical and so wide ranging. As we do a lot of things that are creating inflammation in our ecosystems and in our global environment, we are also experiencing a rise in inflammation inside of our ecosystems because, of course, those things are interconnected and inseparable. What's happening out there is happening in here and vice versa. And so Globe Mallow is an herb of balance. That is the message that this plant is giving humanity right now. The need for balance. We have been taking way too much. We need to start giving more and reestablish the balance between ourselves and the rest of Earth's living systems. And Globe Mallow is a balancer in its ecosystems, and it is a balancer inside of our bodies as well. And that is why this herb is so widely used in Southwestern botanical practices. It's abundant, and these balancing herbs can do opposing things because they can shift things up, shift things down. And so when I first became an herbalist, I couldn't understand how could one herb, both increase and decrease something. But that's because some herbs seek this equilibrium where things have gotten out into disarray. And so in our bodies, in this state of chronic inflammation externally and internally, Globe Mallow is seeking to balance our immune systems. It's one of its primary actions in the body. It likes to help to amplify and more properly coordinate the immune response for people who have sluggish immune systems. So for people who get sick very frequently, or maybe they get a recurring kind of illness every year or every season or every few months, or maybe when they get sick, they have a very hard time getting over it, and just really finishing off their healing process. In those people, Globe Mallow can coordinate a more effective immune response without exciting the immune system, which makes it also appropriate for people with autoimmune conditions who have this overactive, constantly responding immune system. Globe Mallow can actually tamp that down a little bit, calm it down so that it doesn't need to keep responding all the time. And so in this way, Globe Mallow can act in very opposite ways in the immune system, trying to establish an equilibrium and a balanced way of existence. And this is Globe Mallow teaching us how to live in this land, how to live in our bodies. And it's a botanical way of knowing that we can learn and employ in our own lives. And so knowing the land and knowing how Globe Mallow interacts with the land teaches us these things. And Globe Mallow is primarily a water extractable plant. With Juniper, we talked about making an infused oil, or you can also make tinctures or teas out of that. But Globe Mallow is more of a water extractable plant. It has a lot of constituents that are water soluble. And so we generally make tea out of this, but not everyone wants to drink tea, and tea is not the end of herbal artistry. So we can drink tea as it is, but we can also make tea concentrates, make very strong teas that are processed into other things. And so we have different ways of using Globe Mallow, but we're primarily going to be extracting it into water and then taking it from there. One of the things that I find Globe Mallow to be absolutely indispensable for is healing soft tissue. It is demulcent, that's the herbalist term for that, cooling and moistening. The natural antidote to this hot, dry, inflamed environment that we are living in. And so it is Globe Mallow's way of helping us to be balanced in our environment. We are constantly externing all this heat and dryness, and Globe Mallow offers us this cooling, moistening effect through its mucilage. And that extracts really nicely into water. And one thing I like to do, the whole plant contains that, but the roots are pretty strong with that. And so I like to dry the roots and powderize them and mix them into water. And then you have this sort of herbalist thing. It's like kind of, if you imagine making Jell-O out of wood, that's basically what you've done. You've made this woody, brown gelatinous substance that tastes like the desert. And I like that. Not everyone does. I'm the queen of compliance because I've raised children on herbal medicine. So you can take that gelatinous substance and mix it into water or tea or juice or whatever. And it's like drinking a throat lozenge with every sip. So if you've been, say, at a Native Plant Society meeting talking for an hour and a half, and afterwards your throat is really sore or dry or scratchy, you can drink a few sips of that and it just moistens and cools it down. I would never want to have a sore throat or a dry cough without that. It's incredibly alleviating and comforting to sore throat and dry cough. And of course, our whole body is soft tissue. So whether that's ulcerations in your digestive system or scrapes and scratches on your skin, Glow Mallow is going to heal all that soft tissue. So think of Glow Mallow for just about everything. And if that photo wasn't gorgeous enough, here is just a little bit more to show you the different forms. Some of the Glow Mallows are really tall and leggy, like you see here. And also the Spherology of Coccinea on the right is a little bit more of a compact, short species that is wider ranging. And so it is a preferred species for wild harvesting because it has a wider range and it grows in many more habitats. So that's a little bit about Glow Mallow. I'm going to move right along here to Pedicularis. This is another plant that I really like a lot. I like to oftentimes talk about it in the same talks where I talk about Juniper because herbalists in the group may know just how popular Pedicularis is as a medicinal plant within the herbal world. And if you live in, say, the San Juans or anywhere in the Rocky Mountains, Pedicularis may be a very abundant plant for you, but we live kind of on the margins of its range. And so I wouldn't describe it locally as a very abundant plant. And so I encourage my students not to harvest it around here because of that, and to go up into Colorado where you have a multitude of species, much larger, much healthier, more diverse populations. Or think about suitable substitutes when you are dealing with plants that are not abundant in your area. We don't want to rely on those. We want to take care of plant populations and the land in which they grow. We are, as herbalists, land and plant stewards primarily. Harvesting plants is completely secondary to caring for the land and caring for these plants. Without the land, without the plants, we have no life and no herbal practice. So that is the most important thing. And Pedicularis is a teacher of that for us living on the edge of its range, but still susceptible to the lure of this plant. And Juniper shares a lot of qualities with this plant, which I'll get into in a minute, and is just a much more abundant plant for us to use as a suitable substitute. So substituting plants is one way that we can protect wild plant populations. So Pedicularis here, what you're looking at in this picture is a spot up in Colorado that I have visited many times. I never do harvest repeatedly from the same stands year after year. I always allow at least one or two or sometimes more years in between, depending on the situation. Sometimes I never go back to the same place twice. But in this case, I am here fresh tincturing freshly harvested plant parts from this abundant population in a mountain meadow. You see here the sort of creamy white flowers in this mountain meadow are Pedicularis parrii, which is one of many Pedicularis species. And it's a higher elevation species. And I went back probably 5 or 6 years later after I took this original picture where I harvested to go back and see how this meadow I love was doing. And, unfortunately, I have to say, in that amount of time, a lot had changed and it was not as green and not as lush and not as healthy. And so when I went back the second time, I decided just not to take anything other than, my renewed memories of this land. And so sometimes the message for wild crafting or wild harvesting or wild foraging, sometimes that means you're not actually taking any plants. Sometimes wild crafting is just sharing your stories and sharing your memories. Whenever I'm wildcrafting, I always leave stories in gratitude, stories that make me feel gratitude. And I leave that there in this place to thank just the land for the times that we've had together. And if harvesting something feels appropriate, then I might do that. But that's not the goal. The goal is to leave our loving care and intention and our perhaps some active stewardship practices, if that's appropriate as well. So Pedicularis is a plant that we use when we harvest. We only collect leaves and flowers, and so we collect flowers, of course, sparingly, because we never want to impact the reproductive capabilities of a stand of plants. And again, you know, being an ethical wild harvester involves doing your homework. You can't just stand in a stand and say, well, look, there's a lot right here. Well, what if there aren't any other stands around? Then that would be a bad practice to harvest, even though it appeared abundant where you were. And so we do need to know, what are the ranges of these plants? What are the health of these plants in our bioregion? Are these populations shrinking or expanding? What is their prognosis under climate change? These high elevation species like Pedicularis perryi are concerning, because we do see a lot of different things happening in climate change. Not all the patterns we would expect always hold, but we do see a lot of species moving up in elevation. And these higher elevation species, they only have so much up to go. And so I do have some concern about them. And this is why, you know, when herbalists want to use Pedicularis, which is a famous muscle relaxing herb, I have started teaching a lot about Juniper. You know, Pedicularis is really cool and really beautiful. Look at all these amazing different species. You know, you can see why people fall in love with the magic, the beauty of this plant, and want to work with it, right? We want to just internalize this beauty and wonder and the magic of the places where this grows. But remembering that our number one job is to be stewards of the land, we have to say, what is the right thing to do here? Well, remember we talked about Juniper being muscle relaxant, and it's so abundant, and Juniper is really aromatic. So it has some benefits that Pedicularis really doesn't have. But Pedicularis as a teacher has really important messages. And if you know a little bit about how it works in the environment where it lives in its habitats, then we can learn these very important botanical ways of knowing, and we can act accordingly and absorb these ways of knowing and put them to work in our own lives. Pedicularis is a hemiparasitic plant, meaning that it does have host plants and acts as a parasite, taking alkaloids and resources from its host plants, but it doesn't need them. It can photosynthesize on its own. But the cool thing about this is that Pedicularis tends to choose, it has a wide number of potential host species from numerous plant families, but it tends to choose very dominant characters in the landscape. It takes from the most abundant, most successful species who can spare some, and it reallocates these critical resources to the whole ecosystem and to other plants and to pollinators. And actually, we have found from many botanical studies that where Pedicularis grows, there is greater biodiversity of plant species, and that those species produce more fruit and set more seed, because Pedicularis is taking these resources from the rich and allocating them to the poor, and that it is using these resources to summon pollinators with these incredible flowers, these nectar and pollen-rich flowers, and bringing lots of pollinators into the area that benefit all these other plant species that really need that interaction. And also it recycles nutrients in the ecosystem, breaking them down and making them more available to other plants for their increased biomass as well. And so this is providing a lot of ecosystem services, but also where we find this growing in a lot of different environments. It can also be a useful medicinal plant where it is abundant. And one thing that just, really I love about this plant is this lesson of this community coordination. It is the coordinator of its botanical community, and it is bringing out the best in everyone. And I think, I have learned a lot by this model, this way of being in the landscape, knowing how to collaborate with the other members of the community like Pedicularis does. I have tried to embody that in my life and put that into practice as a director of the Yerba Monster Project, as the director of an herbalism school, to act as a community coordinator and to take what is good in the community and put it to use for everyone, and to try to bring out the best in all the people that I work with and come in contact with. That is a goal that Pedicularis has set for me. And I take that teachings of that plan and I do my best to put it into work in my ecosystem, which happens to be a city. So a little city, Albuquerque. So these lessons are there, of how plants are creating health in the land and creating health for us. And the invitation is there for us to also be agents of health in our world, to build health, to build resiliency, to build balance, and to bring out the best in everyone around us as a coordinator of well-being in our communities. And so these are the lessons these plants are giving us all of the time. And you'll notice from this array of pictures here, these different species, just how morphologically variable the flowers are in this genus Pedicularis. And you have this one here, which is called elephant head betony. You can see maybe, hopefully the photo's large enough that these look like little elephant heads with big ears and trunks. This one's called parrot's beak betony, Pedicularis racemosa, because it has a structure that looks like a parrot's beak. And then you have just a variety of different beautiful flowers. Many of them have these fern-like leaves, but not all of them. You see that here on racemosa, a different leaf shape as well. So, if you're just getting to know this plant, you may be really surprised by how different plants within one genus can sometimes look. All right, very cool. I could talk about that all night long. I'm going to move along here to Cottonwood because I want to make sure we have time to talk about that and also have time for the questions I see coming up in the chat, but there's only 8. And I know I posted some of those. So I hope, more of you have some questions because that's fun to discuss your questions. Here's Cottonwood. Populous species are common along waterways around the world, across the United States, but they are very characteristic of our southwestern waterways. And of course, many of you know they are being displaced by our human activities, and which are making space for non-native invasive species to overtake the tree niche in our waterways, where we see species like Russian olive and salt cedar and others taking over where cottonwoods once reigned. And so we do see this shift happening pretty dramatically, especially downstream from dams. Again, this is an opportunity for us to think about our role in these ecosystems and our responsibility for the changes we're seeing. And, our water management practices are key here, and also land conversion, meaning changing natural environments into urbanized or agricultural environments. And so Cottonwood, in its natural habitat, of course, is doing very important jobs in its ecosystem. And this is a plant that I have come to think of really as a nurturer, and it's a matriarchal kind of personality in its habitat. And this is a plant that has really profoundly impacted my life, as are all of these others I'm telling you about here tonight. But Many of you know that I do work in the bosque through the Yerba Mansa Project and other modalities and mechanisms as well. And I've put a lot of my time and energy into land conservation, land restoration. In fact, my whole entire professional life has been involved in that in some way, either through the National Park Service or through other projects that I've created, or through all my years of volunteer service have all been oriented in that way. And, the more I learned about ecology and about environmental change, I walk in these places that I love, especially the bosque, and I saw things differently. Unfortunately, ignorance is bliss. When you don't know what's happening, you can walk in places and just think, oh, what I'm seeing is really beautiful. And it is. But I got to a point where I had learned so much and was so in my head when I was walking in these places that my heart was getting really sad. And I thought about all the changes that were occurring, all the changes that were going to occur. And I started seeing a lot of what was dying, and I wasn't seeing as much what was living. And it was making me sad. And I thought, I come to this place to walk, to lift my spirit and to restore myself, and to have gratitude for this place that I love, where I live. And that wasn't happening anymore. And I thought, I have to do something. I can't go on like this. And that was when I really, in this state of emotional vulnerability and distress, was very receptive to reattuning myself. And I attuned myself with the cottonwoods on that day. I can remember that day. And I felt the mothering matriarchal nurturance of cottonwoods. And that just really penetrated me and filled me with ideas, with hope. It alleviated my despair. It comforted me. It made me trust in the way things are and made me trust in myself. And that was the day when I thought, the cottonwoods may be waning in this environment, but we are rising. I am rising, and I am rising to the challenge to care for this land like the cottonwoods have done for millions of years. We know from the fossil record that cottonwoods have been in this valley for at least 2 million years or more, and they have been doing that work since long before we were here. And now that we have changed their habitat in such a way that they are no longer empowered to do that work, we must take that responsibility to pick up the slack and act as nurturers of the land, the way cottonwoods have modeled to us for our entire time being here. And it's time for us to hear that message and to enact that message of nurturance and caring for the land. And that is the message of cottonwoods for us today. And that was the birth of the Yerba Mansa Project. I thought, well, let's take Pedicularis' message and organize this community. Let's take Cottonwood's message and start nurturing this land. Let's take Glow Mallow's message and start restoring balance. And let's do what Juniper has implored us to do, to embrace this concept of resiliency and to rebuild the resiliency of the land and to rebuild the resiliency of our emotional hearts as we are bombarded with this horrible environmental news. We have to have resilient hearts so that we can keep going and accept these challenges and do this work with gratitude, because we know that we can do it and we can create positive change and create meaningful health initiatives for the land and for ourselves. And that's what the Yerba Mansa Project is about. That's what Albuquerque Herbalism is about. That's what my book is about and all the work that I do. And I am so grateful for the whole community who joins me in all of this work and shares my passion and my enthusiasm for embracing these challenges and doing this job of caring for the land and bringing back plants, restoring plant communities in new and different ways, because we are affecting the land. We always have been. This idea of taking everything that we want And then, kind of evolving into just leaving it alone seems to kind of be the strategy now, in land management. And those things aren't good enough. We need to be actively giving and playing our part in this reciprocity, in this relationship that has to go both ways. And humans have always been caretakers of the land, changing the land. And we've been doing that, of course, but we can do that in different ways. Again, that builds resiliency and caretakes the land. And that is Cottonwood's message, is how to nurture back that which nurtures us. And when it's a two-way street, we have this flowingness, this amazing flowingness that is the source of my unbounded manic energy to do all these things and to love wholeheartedly. And so I'm grateful for all these teachings, for my ability to adjust myself and to attune myself to these botanical ways of knowing and being. And Cottonwood, has been shaping its ecosystem and human culture in our Rio Grande Valley, for as long as it's been here and as long as we've been here. And this is a plant that plays so many roles. It's food, it's medicine, it's a source of wood for material goods, and of course it's a teacher, as I've just described. So this plant is doing so many things. Here's a picture of some medicine making. The leaves, the bark, the catkins, the buds, all of these are parts of the plant that nourish humans and others, plants and animals and the environment. Cottonwoods provide this critical shade. You may see porcupines living up in there, mushrooms growing on their trunks. They are providing all this leaf litter mulch, this habitat for small critters and the recyclers of the forest. And cottonwoods, are like famous rock stars. They live fast and die young. As trees go, they're a short-lived species. They only have about the lifespan of a human. Our last cottonwood reproducing floods were probably about 70, 80 years ago. So that tells you right there, you don't need to be good at math to figure out that cottonwood forests are senescing and being replaced by non-native plant species that we mentioned earlier. And so this shift is taking place, but cottonwood remains a staple of herbal practice in the Southwest. And here is a little bit about what I like, how I like to work with cottonwood. The leaves and the bark, as I mentioned, are medicinal, though they're not my favorite parts to gather. The bark, you may notice from this previous, there's not a good picture of the bark, but the bark is really, really thick. The outer bark is inert on trees in general. If you know anything about tree physiology, you know that the xylem and phloem, that cambium layer underneath the outer bark, is where the vitality is. That's like the seat of plant intelligence, is in the meristems and cambium layer. And it's also the sort of like energetic highways, sort of like our vascular system, where all the blood and nutrients and oxygenation and all the good stuff is flowing to and from throughout the tree. And so that is a medicinal part of trees, is that cambium layer. And so that is something that people do harvest from cottonwoods, though cottonwoods, you may know, are very closely related to aspens, which don't have that super thick outer bark. And so aspens are actually a little bit better, I think, for bark harvesting than cottonwoods. And the leaves are also harvested. Leaves and bark are used commonly for respiratory conditions, bronchial inflammation and coughing. The catkins are delicious to eat. I don't know if you've ever, if there's any wild food foragers in the group, but they're pretty tasty. I like to put them in vegetable sautés. I will say it's surprising how sweet they are. You know, when I first ate one, I was like prepared for bitterness, right? You know, you're just picking some catkins off a tree. You think this is probably not going to be that good. But it's actually really tasty. Trust me, try it. You know, springtime's coming up. You're going to be seeing catkins before long. Taste one and see what you think. You may be surprised. And then as a medicine, let's go back to this because this is like my favorite thing. This is another, I'm really into herbal oils. I love topical herbal remedies. And so I talked about juniper oil. That's, you know, really probably, you know, one of my favorites. I like Grandelia oil too. Maybe they tied for first, but Cottonwood Bud Oil is high on the list too. And I love it because cottonwoods are part of the willow family, and many of those members are very high in salicin, which is a potent anti-inflammatory compound. There's tons of scientific research behind it. And, you know, I haven't talked a lot about that here tonight. I know so many people in this group, so I'm just telling you really what I think. But if you really want to look at all of the ecological research and all of the phytochemical research, all the ethnobotanical documentation, the herbalist history of these plants, all of that is contained in my book. It is thoroughly researched and referenced. So those of you who are like, hey, where's the scientific facts? They're all in the book. So check it out. But this salicin is a very potent anti-inflammatory compound. And it's, you know, the stuff pharmacists isolated to make aspirin. That originally came from the meadowsweet plant, but the willows are very high in that compound as well. And we can extract that a number of ways depending on the plant that we're talking about. But in the case of cottonwoods, a great way to do that is to harvest these buds, which, you know, we're right about that time of year. You know, normally I collect cottonwood buds usually the first week of March or the second week of March, like right at the tail end of winter, right before the spring equinox. Is when I typically do that. Though I have noticed the last couple of years that A, the buds have been a little dry, and B, they've been, you know, subject to changing temperatures, and they just haven't been as good. And I've been picking them a little bit earlier. So, you know, maybe start looking at them here soon for harvesting. But really you can see in this picture, the resin on the buds. And, you know, we live with this common delusion that plants are making these compounds to heal us. That's just a bonus that happens to benefit us. It's like, oh, you know, we're lucky that worked out. But, you know, they're making these medicinal compounds for themselves to live their best lives and to contribute to their communities. And you know, cottonwoods are producing this resin to protect their buds while, you know, these fragile parts are forming. And so you can see that resin on the outside, which protects them from insects. And that resin is tremendous. And that is the stuff we'd really like to harvest. So when you're looking for cottonwood buds, the treasure trove, honestly, is to go out right after a windy day, a really windy day, and look for a freshly downed branch that's loaded with buds. And you can just collect a whole jar full right from that branch that's laying on the ground. And that's the ideal way to harvest. If you can't find that, then you can pick a bud here, pick a bud there, you know, keep going, remembering that each one of these is a leaf that won't grow if you take the bud. So keep that in mind. But they're pretty, you know, pretty many buds on a tree. So you could take a few and go to the next tree and keep collecting. You don't need that many. That's the thing, is when you're collecting plant material from the wild, you know, a little goes a long way, especially if you're just making it for yourself. So always be mindful not to take any more than you actually need. And so a small jar of these is probably going to be all you need. And I put them here, you can see in this picture, I put them in my crock pot. When you are trying to extract anything resinous into oil, a very, very gentle heat applied makes for a better extraction. And so I have this sitting in a hot water bath in my crock pot on the lowest setting, and I leave it there for days. You know, every day I refill the water. There's no water in the jar. It's just around the jar, keeping the resinous buds slightly warm. We don't want to cook or heat anything too high and invite any chemical changes or breakdown of plant constituents. But this warm water bath technique provides very gentle warming. And so I have in the jar these buds with oil, and the jar is placed in this warm water bath in the crock pot. And I like the little tiny crock pots that people use for queso because those don't get high temperatures. They're not made for cooking food. They're just made for keeping food warm. And that's really what we as herbalists want for these kinds of medicine making. And as far as oils go, you can use whatever you like. I am, the traditional herbalist oil is olive oil, extra virgin organic olive oil. But when you use that alone, it's a little bit greasy, it doesn't absorb into the skin as fast as some of the other oils. And so I usually like to mix my oils. I like olive oil, but I also really like avocado oil, grapeseed oil. And if it's something that is not aromatic at all, I will also sometimes use cottonwood or coconut oil. But for anything aromatic, coconut kind of changes the smell. So in any case, you can use what oils you like, and it's something that's safe to eat is going to be safe for your skin. And many of those oils are actually really nutritive to the skin or anti-inflammatory to the skin. So they have their own healing properties as well. But then we're extracting this bud resin into it. And so it has the smell of cottonwoods, that nurturing, inflammation reducing, calm down, it's okay kind of feeling when you have that rubbed onto your body. It is very pain relieving, very antimicrobial, and very muscle relaxing. And so, and this is another plant that has been used for thousands of years in this way. In fact, it's been used around the world. You may have heard of Balm of Gilead, which is a famous remedy from the Middle East and Asia using poplar species from over there. And so these herbal traditions, especially when we are talking about genera, that have global distributions, like there are Pedicularis species, poplar species, Juniper species around the world. And when you look at the ethnobotanical literature and modern day herbal practices, it's amazing, really, how much we're all the same and how people have been learning the same ways of botanical knowing around the world on different continents. And this connectivity, this global connectivity of our consciousness and our desire to heal and to be healed is universal. And people have been taking care of these plants on continents all over and throughout different cultures and different times. And, we know from archaeological ethnobotanical research that humans, including Neanderthals, have been working with plants ceremonially, ritually, medicinally. They were the original wild food foragers. We have 65,000-year-old Neanderthal graves where people have been buried with blooming medicinal plants. They have medicinal plants in their teeth that they were chewing. This is not new. This is not new age stuff. This is our roots. This is what we've always been doing. And this is what connects us to each other, not just humans, but connects plants, people, places, landscapes, humanity. This is a conduit to our connectivity and to our global collaboration to solve these problems that we have. And so I want to leave you with just this one last thought before we open it up to questions. This idea that human health and land health are the same thing. Ecosystem health and cultural health are the same thing. These are inseparable. They feed one another. And we look to plants to be our agents of health that nourish us and heal us. but they need nourishing and healing too, and we need to care for them. And so this is a reciprocal relationship of caring, nurturance, balance, resiliency, and looking after one another, that we share this network of life. We are all connected and responsible for one another. And that is really the message of my book, my teachings, my life. And I hope you will share it with me in some way beyond tonight, even in your own private practice, your private life, or by joining other events that I do. And I'll put those links in the chat again. And here also are some websites where you can find the things that I do, join me for other activities and events that I do. And I'm going to put these links that I had back in the chat while Sarah figures out what questions we should talk about.
And thank you so much, Dara. That was just really wonderful, wonderful. And I actually recopied those. They're already in the chat, and most people should be able to see them.
Great.
And I'm hoping maybe that you can read some of the questions, because some of them are quite complicated. But I think we should start, but they're great. I think we should start at the top. There was a question about the base oil, and you answered that. Mm-hmm. What type of oil particularly do you use for juniper, and what ratio?
So juniper is a really aromatic plant. So that's where I wouldn't really want to use the coconut oil, just because I don't, I want the full juniper blast. With juniper, I'll be honest, I make things differently. I'm a very intuitive person in the kitchen. I'm not really big on measuring. For me, herbalism is both an art and a science. The environmental science part is where I like to get all sciencey on it. And when I'm in the kitchen, that's more of my creative, artistic practice. And so, there's many different ways to engage in this. Some people are all sciencey, some people are all creative, and some people do it different ways. But for me, with juniper, I like grapeseed oil and avocado oil mixed with a little olive oil. I'll usually do part olive oil and then part one of those other two oils. And sometimes it just depends on what I have in my pantry. I'm also really big on just using what you have. And I'm really old school. If you have to buy anything expensive or get something you can't really find, just forget it. That's not the way. This is all about sustainability and aligning with what is. And so if you have suitable oils already in stock in your pantry, I would recommend those. There are many, many oils you could use. If you're making this to use for like a baby, for like, maybe like a cranky baby, or you're using Cottonwood Bud Oil as like a diaper salve, then I might go with like apricot oil, because that's like really nourishing in the skin. So, I don't know, artistic license, man, you could do a lot of things. I'm just telling you what I do. There's many right ways to do things. So whatever I say isn't the law. Recipes are suggestions.
And Dara, I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's a wonderful question here from Lee about if the pharma industry expands phytochemistry research, would that be a positive development? That is more respect for plants, or negative, divorcing herbal use from the landscape? We could probably have a whole nother hour on that.
That is a great question, and a really complicated one. And I think people have really different views about it. I have mixed feelings about it personally. On one hand, I'm for it because, the popularity of herbalism and wild food foraging is really surging. And there are a lot of people out there picking plants out of the landscape with no real knowledge about what their impact might be or what the consequences of their action might be. I get emails all the time from people being like, hey, I picked all this, dandelion, something you think people could easily recognize and identify, and asking me about how to process it. And my response is, that's not dandelion. Don't eat that. I mean, people don't know what they're doing. And, they watched a YouTube video and now they think that they're safe to go identify plants and pick them and make medicines and heal people, and I think I made the point at the beginning of this talk about how complicated herbalism is and how many different fields of knowledge you need to have. And so with the popularity of this, I'm really concerned about wild plant populations. And even if we're cultivating plants, there are questions there about, do they have the same phytochemical, configurations as wild populations? And then you get into like endophytic organisms and mycorrhizal connections and all these things that, may not be happening in your cultivated plants. So it's really, really complex. But, in order to serve the growing desire for natural remedies, natural wild foods in a growing human population globally, I do think that there is a role for laboratory made chemical isolates. I don't want to be using that. I want to be using whole plant medicines. But not everybody shares that view, and that's fine. And different medicine for different people. I think there are different roles for these different kinds of herbal products to play. I'm always going to be harvesting and making my own, and I teach other people to do that as well. But not everybody wants to learn that. Not everybody wants to make their own stuff. They just want to buy a little herbal capsule and just keep taking pills because that's their health paradigm that they've lived in. And if pharmacists and phytochemists can make herbal pills for people out of chemical isolates, or even fabricating these chemical constituents, then, there's a population for that. And, it's not my practice and it never will be, but not everybody connects with the message that I'm giving about our interconnectivity. Some people aren't going to get that and don't want to hear that. So, maybe that's for them.
Great, thank you. And then we're getting into globe mallow. So we have about 3 or 4 questions there with globe mallow. Can you share more ways to use it? Do you use a cold water, long overnight infusion for the tea? Or do you prefer hot water and a short steep? And then I put one in there about a bug, which I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And it's supposed to be a monocrop, not a mojo crop.
I hate that botanical spell checking. It ruins my botanical names every time I try to type them in there. Okay, so these are great questions too. With globe mallow, a cold water infusion is the best if you want to extract the most of that slimy, slippery mucilage. So if you really want that, then a cold water infusion is the way to go because the mucilage is damaged by heat. So that's a good question. And I do not do long steeping times. I know some herbalists do that, but the steeping time matters. Depending on how long you're steeping it, different things are going to be extracted. And if you're, doing that with a plant, say that has a lot of tannins, the longer you steep it, the more of those tannins you're going to get out. And that can really upset people's stomachs. Also, more of the bitter compounds come out the longer you steep it. As I mentioned earlier, I've raised children on herbal medicine. So, and I like things that taste good also. So I'm a big believer in making herbal remedies taste good. And so really long steep times usually make teas taste pretty gross. And, as a practitioner of herbalism, that really reduces compliance in most people. And if you can make all the herbal remedies in the world, but if people don't want to take them, then they do no good, so compliance is really important in meeting people where they are and making remedies that they will actually consume. So flavor, aroma, texture, all those things matter. Also the delivery method. Some people just aren't going to drink tea. That's where you have tinctures, or other modalities as well. So I'm not a big fan of the long steep times. So I don't do that. And then I don't know, Sarah, really, I don't have a good answer for your question, though I have seen that too, but I don't know what that is. And so we're going to have to ask somebody else about that.
Good, let's keep going. More ways to use globe mallow.
Oh, yeah. So, balancing the immune system, we talked about that. Healing soft tissue, we talked about that. Those are primary uses, but globe mallow is used, for so many things. That's why I said it's one of the most used herbs in my apothecary. I include it in formulas for allergies. In fact, that has been one of my most successful formulas of all time, is including that globe mallow for allergies and chronic inflammation. Any kind of chronic inflammatory condition, globe mallow is going to be great for that. For convalescents, people who have had a long road coming back from a hard hit, globe mallow is going to be excellent for that. It's great for people who have chronic digestive ailments like celiac or Crohn's disease, because they're living with constant state of mild ulceration in their digestive system. So it's really helpful for digestive ailments. Also commonly used for respiratory ailments, especially dry respiratory conditions, because it's cooling and moistening and stimulating to the immunological cells in there. Quite honestly, I would say there's probably nothing I can think of that globe mallow isn't good for, unless you have, somebody who just really hates that plant and won't take it. But globe mallow, being this balancing kind of herb, is broadly useful. I love it and would highly recommend, if you just get to know a small handful of plants in our area, that should be one of them.
Well, and then go on to allergies. For those with juniper pollen allergies, are there any additional caveats or benefits in terms of using other juniper parts in tea and tincture? Have you seen any incidental improvement in allergies, or just go with more globe mallow?
Well, the juniper allergy thing is a big deal. A lot of people really suffer with that, and it's the time of year where it starts right now. And my take on that is to use juniper. Don't harvest during the pollen time, though. Wait until after it's done producing all that pollen. So don't harvest it in the spring. Wait until summer to harvest juniper. Though I have an advanced herbalist program that I teach, and the students in there are just these incredible creative herbalists. And some of, they have to make and develop their own formulas and recipes and share them and tell us about them. And we provide peer group feedback on their formula developments. And I had one student one year who had severe juniper allergies, and she tinctured juniper pollen. She went out in a mask and like a full protective suit. This was before the pandemic, before we ever thought about things like that. And she collected pollen and tinctured it and microdosed herself over months, and gradually kind of acclimatized her ecosystem to that pollen, and reduced her allergy symptoms yearly by doing that. And so that is a study of one. So scientifically speaking, not very sound, but it was a very compelling story. And she did a lot of things that sound very credible to me, and she experienced the positive results. So that's a possibility. Allergies are complicated, and you're really trying to build foundational health. Especially with seasonal allergies, this is a very complicated topic. We don't really have time to address it properly here, but you're talking about building nutritional health, so your diet, you're taking anti-inflammatory compounds months ahead of your allergen exposure. People who have springtime allergies, I start telling them, like after Thanksgiving dinner, that should be what you start thinking about, is preparing yourself for your allergy season, building your immune system, building your baseline health through nutritional foods, and start taking anti-inflammatory herbs like nettles, oats, mallow, things like that. And then make sure you have also another herb on hand that will address your symptoms, whatever they are. Allergies can be wet eyes and runny nose. In that case, you want like a real drying herb like goldenrod or yerba mansa or something like that. If you get, whatever your symptom is, you want to have an herb that's going to address that too. So complicated topic, but I hope that gets you thinking in the right direction about formulations.
Okay, well then what about some things with the cottonwood? Would love to hear more about how you went about attuning yourself to the cottonwoods.
Yeah, that's something that just has been really potent in my life. For those of you who don't know me, I have a background in geography and environmental studies. And so, my whole framework for approaching herbalism is a little different than a lot of herbalists. I'm thinking about ecology and relationships and interconnections, right? And systems in the landscape. And that is how I approach herbalism. And, I just, learning about all of these things sort of set me up to think about the work that the cottonwoods are doing every day in their lives. They're nurturants, they're providing habitat, they're providing food and medicine and material goods and moving water in the landscape, providing shade. I mean, they're giving the structure of life to that system and all the other organisms that live there. And, as that influence, I could, you could see it waning and just trying to learn their way of being, by observing. Plants can't speak to us in a verbal language or a language that we can hear. They speak to us by their models, their way of being. And when we observe their way of being, we learn their way of knowing. And this is why spending time in plant habitats is so important. People are always asking me, where can I go to harvest this? Where can I go to harvest that? And I never tell, not because I'm mean or secretive, but because I want people to have their own process of learning to love the places they live by exploring and spending time. If I tell people where the destination is, they'll go straight to it and they'll miss all the good stuff along the way. And this is a journey. It's not a destination. This is a process of our becoming. And so, it's the more time we spend in these places and experiencing this flowingness of life between all the elements of lands, including us. I think of, not just plants and animals as living beings, but the earth itself and places are, my book talks about living landscapes. And so, this vital resonance is something we can experience. And the vitality of earth systems is something we can experience, but we have to be there and we have to open ourselves up. And that doesn't happen in 5 minutes or a single visit. It happens by making yourself available repeatedly, by loving that place and knowing that place and being there to pick up on all these signals. And people, can do that in different ways. I mean, I've known lots of herbalists who talk all about their dream time and botanical dreams. And I'm like, oh, I don't dream of plants. But I have plant communications in other ways, and it's just a matter of what are we receptive to, and allowing for that in our lives. Most of us are very busy. working jobs, raising kids, going to school, doing whatever. And we don't make enough time for these experiences. And so that really is the key.
Great, thank you. Well, and then a couple of little more technical ones. Collecting buds from fallen branches. How old can the buds be before they're no longer useful? And then also with, yeah, go ahead.
So just to answer that quickly, you can just feel the buds. If you come to a fallen branch, you may not know how long ago that broke off. So, you just want to feel the buds, pinch them a little bit. And this is true even for ones on trees, because sometimes they can be kind of dry. Cottonwoods are not getting enough water, and so sometimes even the ones on trees are dried out. You don't ever want to pick those. So even if you find a branch on the ground or one on a tree, you want to pinch the buds. You should be able to feel a little bit of tackiness, a little bit of sticky resin. If you don't feel that, don't pick them. That's plant communicating right there.
And then when you're using the catkins, are you talking the male catkins?
Yeah. So, in the springtime, you'll see some of the buds just open up and it's like a clown car, the bud looks really small. And then all of a sudden there's this long red thing that comes out of it. You're like, how did that, come out of this little space, right? That's good eating when you see those hanging out of there, and you can see, the trees just look red from afar. So that's what you want to pick and eat. They're surprisingly good, like I said.
Great, great. I'm looking through this. We have many thank yous and appreciations. We have, how would you administer juniper for GI issues?
So juniper for the digestive tract, that is going to be, it can do a few things in there. It can act as an antimicrobial. So if you have something pathogenic going on, it can also act as an herb that cuts gas and bloating as a symptom of poor digestion. So poor digestion is a fundamental aspect of clinical herbal treatments. Oftentimes, herbalists will start with digestion and make recommendations that help improve a person's digestion, even if that's not their chief complaint. But oftentimes, if you can improve a person's digestion, it has all of these unintended health benefits that might help other health problems. So having good digestion is super important. And we're finding that many, many health conditions are actually connected to our gut biota and how we're digesting food properly or not. It can actually cause a lot of inflammation in the body if we're not digesting food properly. So it's a really important question, a really big question to answer properly, but juniper can be taken as a tincture. And I will say it is very strong as a tincture. So I usually recommend that people start really small and the berries would be used for this. And you can also make the berries into tea if you like juniper berry tea. I really like it. I love juniper berry tea, and I would drink it just for enjoyment, even though it's kind of resinous-y, but I like it. Some people think it is so gross, they can't even stand to be around me when I'm drinking it because of the smell of it. So, if that is the case, then maybe juniper tincture is going to be your way, because tincture is an extract into alcohol and water, and it's measured in drops. So you're really only taking a few drops. Maybe like a big dose would be like 90 drops, right? That would be a huge dose of something like a full dose. And with juniper, usually you need less than that because it is very strong. So you could take those drops in water, and it will help to cut gas and bloating. It will act as an antimicrobial in both the digestive and urinary systems, if those are going to be helpful elements to you. If your digestive problems need other things, other kinds of actions, then you'd be looking at other herbs. And so, you know, there are many, many herbs that are useful for digestion. If you have chronic digestive problems, juniper may not be the herb you need, you know, and I wouldn't recommend taking juniper every day for long periods of time. I think it's too strong. You know, we have things that we call tonic herbs. Globe mallow is one of them, but you know, tonic herbs are safer for everyday long-term use, and actually they have their greatest benefits when used that way. And so that might be a kind of herb that you need, would be you know, an herb that is going to work tonically in the digestive system, that's safe for everyday use. It's not, you know, I don't know, juniper has sort of like a brute force kind of character to it as a medicine. You know what I mean? It's not for the timid. You know, as much as I love it, I mostly use it as a topical, and I resort to it internally when I need something like really hard hitting.
Great. And I think, you know, we will stop there. Dara, I hope you have a minute to look at all the wonderful thank yous that are in the chat, which I echo.